This meritocracy discussion to baseball, where Hall of Famer Joe Morgan is calling on constituents to keep performance-enhancing drug users out of Cooperstown. A day after the Hall of Fame named the 33 players who are on the 2018 ballot, Morgan sent a letter to all the voters saying, in part, "We hope the day never comes when known steroid users are voted into the Hall of Fame. They cheated. Steroid users don't belong here. Players who failed drug tests, admitted using steroids, or were identified as users in Major League Baseball investigation into steroid abuse, known as the Mitchell Report, should not get in." Joining me now, Fox News contributor and sportscaster Jim Gray. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Charles, good to be with you.
It's great to have you. You've covered it all. You've Super Bowls, World Series, major boxing matches, and the one thing about the world of sports is that it typically is the epitome of meritocracy until these performance-enhancing drugs arrived on the scene.
Well, that's correct, and it became part of the landscape, and baseball profiteered off of that, and baseball allowed it to go on while it was going on. And then they cleaned it up, and when they cleaned it up, they tried to get rid of it all. Problem is a lot of the times, just like it is in track and field and these Olympic sports, the cheaters are ahead of the drug testing. So now Joe Morgan sends out this letter. And it's interesting, it's a dilemma. Are you going to punish these guys who were in the steroid era because everybody wants it to be clean and everybody wants it to be pure, but they were part of an era that, as I just said, baseball profiteered on. We didn't keep out people of the Hall of Fame when they weren't playing against the Negro players because the Negro leagues were not allowed in. We didn't keep people out when they changed the height of the mound because they changed the height of the mound. We didn't keep people out in the amphetamine era, so now it's a very difficult decision for these voters. And Barry Bonds was a Hall of Famer long before he ever took a steroid. His performance on the field was great. So I love Joe Morgan personally. I don't think that this is sustainable, and I just don't happen to agree as we go forward.
Well, then would you put someone like a Barry Bonds, who, by the way, at one point was my favorite player, I had his rookie baseball card, but would you put him in the Hall of Fame with an asterisk attached to his name? I mean, there's got to be something that says he didn't break Hank Aaron's record on his own.
Well, maybe it's part of the plaque. But they put Bud Selig in the Hall of Fame last year, and Bud Selig presided over the steroid era. He also did a wonderful job in cleaning it up. He did a great job in growing the game. But he also was a part of that era. They don't put an asterisk next to the commissioner's name, and he watched it all go on. So no, I think they have to be very, very careful how they judge history here and how they decide who are their friends and who aren't.
Well, is the Hall of Fame for the fans or for the players? And let's not forget, these same steroid-using players were richly rewarded. They all became multimillionaires. In fact, they had distinct advantages over folks who they played against who didn't use steroids. So in many ways, they've been rewarded. They were lionized. They made commercials. They're living a pretty comfortable life. What about the fans in this regard? Where do we come down in the consideration for the fan who may say, hey, I don't want to see someone who didn't do it the right way?
Well, the fans have a voice. They don't have a vote, but they certainly have a voice. And I think that the fans should be listened to. And I don't think that you're going to find a plurality of any of it. I don't think the fans know. I mean, it's interesting that Joe Morgan, who writes this letter, also espouses and supports Pete Rose, who signed his own banishment from the game, who committed the cardinal sin. So on one hand, he says, steroid users, you don't belong, but Pete Rose, my teammate, you do belong. There's a hypocrisy in this, and you can't make the rules your friends. If you don't like it, nobody's for cheating. Nobody is for cheating. But it was a part of the game, and I think that they have to come to grips with that portion and that era of the game. How they exactly do it, do they mark the plaques, do they keep these guys out, do they eventually let them in? I think they're going to have to come to grips with it.
All right. Well, if Cooperstown is going to be a cathedral to baseball, they need to find a way to have to point out the purity and the non-purity, I would say. Real quick.
One last thing, Charles. We don't live in the Soviet Union. You don't wipe out a man's record because you don't like the era that he played in.
All right, Jim Gray, a little bit of Pravda for us. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.